Hello everyone, it's Sheila back again. Welcome to my channel. I'm doing a little video log today. I'm going to tell you about my knitting machine that I used to have. I've told in a lot of videos about some old cones of wool that I've had left over from my knitting machine days. So I'm going to tell you a little story how I started out with the knitting machine and why I don't use it anymore and that. So this is a little story. It starts when I was about 10 years old and my mother bought a knitting machine. And in those days, the knitting machine, there was no punch cards or anything like that. There wasn't even buttons to press to do patterns. You had to push the needles out by hand. You had the little tool, you push the needles out. And you didn't have cones or anything, and it was just a ball of wool on the floor, and you put the wool over the needles and push the carriage over, and the carriage used to push the needles back and drop the knitting down one row, and so you used to have to push the needles out again and put the wool over, and that's the way this knitting machine was. I think, I'm not absolutely certain, it might have been a Knitmaster that she bought. But anyway, she'd only had it about a week, and there was one day one of her friends from down the street was up and the two of them were trying to work this knitting machine. And could the hell get away with it? Neither of them could work this knitting machine. They were just getting themselves annoyed. So they disappeared out the house. I think my mum says, I'm just popping down to, I think it was some auntie. We'd call all mum's friends aunties in them days. I forget what her name was, but they're going down to auntie's for a while. So I says, well, can I have a go on the knitting machine while you're out? Can I play with the knitting machine? My mum says, please yourself. She says, if you can do it, you're better than us. So anyway, they went down the street and I started playing with that knitting machine, and I found it very easy. I don't know how they found it so hard. And I was putting the wool over the needles and pushing the carriage across. And by the time my mother came back home, I had knit myself a scarf. Couldn't believe it when she seen it, and she says, the only one that can work that knitting machine and you're only 10 years old. So I was quite happy with that, and I used it for about 2 weeks, and I was knitting clothes for my dolls, little skirts and little cardigans and what I thought were good, but it was a little bit practice. And then one day I came home from school and the knitting machine wasn't there. And I was saying to my mum, I says, where's the knitting machine? I says, I was busy doing some things for me. Oh, I've sold it. She says, it's no good to me, I can't use it. Well, I mean, when you're a 10-year-old, you've got no choice in it. They don't think about you, But anyway, that was my first time on a knitting machine. And the next time after that, I was married and had my kids. My kids were just little. And at the time, I used to do some childminding that used to help with a little bit extra money for me and my husband, and that to keep us out of debt and that. And anyway, I was looking after this little girl. I was a registered childminder. Samantha, her name was, and her mother used to bring her early in the morning to my house, and I had her all day until about 6 o'clock. And she was paying me monthly because she was a job she had that she was getting paid monthly. So she paid me monthly. She asked if I didn't mind if she paid me monthly, and I said, well, I don't mind. So anyway, this little girl was before 8 o'clock in the morning. My kids were sitting having their breakfast. The two oldest ones were going to school, and the youngest one was just about a year older than Samantha, was only about 18 months old at the time, and my youngest one, Ian, was about 2.5. So she had him to play with, but I noticed when she used to sit and look at them when they were sitting eating their breakfast, and she says, Samantha, do you want something to eat? Have you had your breakfast? And a little 18-month-old I think I realised after a couple of mornings that she was coming out early and had no breakfast. So I used to feed her breakfast, lunch and tea, and then I think it was her sisters. She had there was about a 15-year gap between them, and her sister used to come in from school. Well, I think she was actually getting ready to start work at my sister, but she used to pick her up about 6 o'clock and take her home. So this went on. I looked after her for about a year. And I noticed she had an odd little cardigan now and again that looked like it had been knitted on a knitting machine. And I asked her mother about it, and she said she had this knitting machine, but she said she never used it, she couldn't get away with it, and she said I could borrow it if I wanted. So she brought the knitting machine around to my house, and it was a little bit more modern than the one my mother had. It had a, when you had it on the table, it had a thing at the back and it had big wire hook things that came up, and you put the wool in a cone and come through the wires, and you just move the carriage backwards and forwards across the machine. It had buttons, I think there was 8 buttons, and you press these buttons for each row if you were doing a pattern for whatever pattern you wanted. And it had a lace carriage on it, and you used to push the lace carriage over one side and the knitting carriage over the other. And so you used to be knitting like this, you know, if you were doing a lace pattern. And I was quite enjoying it. And anyway, this little girl, I think I looked after her for about a year. In the last couple of months, her mother stopped paying me. And I told her, you know, I says, you can't go on like this. I says, this is a job. I says, if you're not going to pay me, I'm afraid you're going to have to take your little girl somewhere else. And well, she asked me if I'd take her out for one last month, and she said she would see what she could do, but she was having trouble with money herself. So after this 3rd month, I still never got paid. And I told her, I says, well, I'm sorry, I can't look after her anymore. I says, you're just not paying me for this. I says, and you owe me 3 months' money. You know, I says, it's not right, you know. And so she suggested, she says, well, I can't pay you, but she says, if you would take the knitting machine in payment, you know, she says, I've lost my job anyway. She says, so I won't be needing a babysitter anymore, like, you know. So anyway, I took the knit machine from her, and that was how I started with the knit machine. And after a while, I started getting 1 or 2 orders from some of my friends and the neighbours, and that rosebud lace pattern that I've been doing was the one I made up for the knitting machine, and it was very popular. I think nearly every kid in my neighbourhood had a cardigan with that pattern on, even the adults and mothers and that as well. But I used to do a lot of other patterns, and the fair isle was pretty popular. So I used this knitting machine for about 2 years, and with the money that I was getting paid for knitting these other little cardigans and that, I had enough money to save up for a better knitting machine. I got a one with a punch card, where you just put the card in and you didn't have to press the buttons anymore. The card did it, pushed the needles out all automatically, and I got a lot of attachments for it. There was I don't know, some of you older people might remember those licorice all sort jumpers that were popular from that, I think it was a newsreader, and I think her name was, she came on television one day with a sweater on that had all the licorice all sorts all over it. And it just took off from there. Everybody wanted licorice all sorts on the jumpers and cardigans. So I managed to work the pattern out on a punch card and put it in my machine. Well, at first I was having to change all these colours by hand. Every time I come to a different colour, I was having to change the, you know, for the different licorice all sorts, the white ones, the blue ones and the pink ones. And I was changing the, changing into all the colours, and then I thought, oh, there must be an easier way than this. And so I started looking into attachments you could get for the machine, and there was a thing called a colour changer, and it fixed on the end of the machine, and you pushed the carriage into it and pressed a button, and you could have 4 different colours in it, and it changed the colours. So you were knitting, each time you come to a different colour, you just push it into this colour changer and change the colour, and that was great. I was doing that and had lace carriage like the other machine. And then I got attachments for, I already had attachment, I bought an attachment for doing the ribs. So you got proper ribs like the ones you knit. Otherwise, the older one that I was doing, I either had to knit the ribs by hand and attach them onto the knitting machine to do the body parts, or else you had a rib that was turned in and stitched down like that. Or wasn't stitched down, it was, you turned it in onto the machine, and so you went across and it put those 2 lots of stitches, then knitted those 2 lots of stitches together. But I preferred the proper knitted one, so I bought an attachment that did proper ribs, so I could do the proper ribs. I didn't have to do them by hand. And then I bought another attachment that when you were doing the knitting from the when you had finished doing the rib, you had a machine like that and a one down the bottom, and the two lots used to come together, and that's how you did the rib. Well, you had stitches on the bottom one and stitches on the top one, and you had to transfer the stitches from the bottom one onto the top after you had finished the rib. So I got this other attachment that you put on, and you just pushed it over these two parts of the machine, and it transferred all these stitches automatically. So that was another bit of help. That was very good. And then I started doing, when you're doing the necks and that, and when you're turning the necks down and you're putting the two lots of stitches on for to attach the necks, you know, like these necks here. And I was having to do those by hand as well. You had to transfer a lot of stitches, and after you knitted the rib part, and transfer the stitches again. And then to cast those stitches off, I bought another attachment that you put on the machine, and you just turned the handle like this and pushed it all the way across all the stitches, and it used to cast off all those stitches. It did everything for you. So I had everything going for that machine that I could possibly need. And life was going great, and I was doing school jumpers, and mind you, at the time the taxman was taking a lot of what I was earning as well, because you were only allowed, with my husband working and then me working as well, we were only allowed a certain amount before, you know, the taxman got involved, and he took a lot of what I was earning. And that was okay for a while, but after a little while, well, my husband was in his early 40s and he had a heart attack. So he couldn't work anymore. And this heart attack led to blood clots in his lungs, and he was really ill and that. And so he had to give up work. He lost his job anyway. But I was still doing this knitting, and then with my husband being on sickness benefit and all that, I had to declare what I was doing, and I wasn't allowed to keep very much of what I was making. I had to, well, it wasn't me, it was my husband lost a lot of, after so many, I'm not sure exactly how long, after a certain length of time, they took what I was earning from what he was getting from the sickness thing, and it went on like that anyway. But we still managed, we still kept ourselves out of debt, because I used to get a lot of orders for all the kids' school jumpers and school, you know, the cardigans for the little girls, and all, like, not just the school things, they all liked all the little cardigans. I had a lot of friends, and I had one or two friends who worked in factories, and they used to take things in there and sell them for me in there and get orders from in the factories. And then after a while, these schools decided that the children had to have these, you know, the sweatshirts instead of the knitted sweaters and cardigans. So my orders started dropping off, and I wasn't getting enough, and I didn't think it was worth it, because the, you know, the DHSS or whatever you call them, my husband's sickness benefit, they were just taking everything off me. So I packed it in, and I was just doing it for myself, for my family, and that, knitting for us and that. And then I started getting a little bit trouble with my neck when I was knitting. When I was going backwards and forwards like this with the carriages, it was starting to affect my neck, and then it was going on to my shoulders. And anyway, I had to go to the doctor to find out, and I've got arthritis in my spine, and the knitting machine was aggravating it. So after a while, I couldn't do it anymore, so I had to give it up. And I sold actually sold the knitting machine with all the attachments and everything. It must have cost me about £1,000 for all these attachments and everything. And all I could get for it, the whole lot, was £100. But I was happy because I needed the money, and I went back to my hand knitting. But when I used to have this knitting machine, I used to have it upstairs in the bedroom. And that's where I used to do the knitting, because I having all the kids at home. I had no spare rooms or anything to do it in, and it was in my, mine and my husband's bedroom. And I used to sit and knit up there, and I used to sit and knit at night time. And there was one time, one of my sons, I think my middle son, Tony, he was talking about, I I had shown him how to use the knitting machine. I still had my old knitting machine and then this new punch card one I had bought. And I'd showed him how to use the knitting machine, and they were quite fascinated. And he knew how to use the machine, and he could get away with it quite well. Well, at the time, he was talking about wanting one of those BMX bikes. And he already had an ordinary, you know, the ordinary racer type bike, but he wanted one of these BMX ones. And I said, well, it's not your birthday, it's not Christmas. You know, I said, can't afford to just go and buy you a bike, you know, like that. So I suggested to him, I says, I'll give you some work to do on the knitting machine. I showed him how to do it and how to work it. And I says, and you can do some work on the knitting machine. I'll give you just some parts of sweaters and cardigans and things. And he managed it very well, so I let him do it. And I said, I'll save up a little bit of the money. I'll pay you for doing the things, and we'll save up a little bit of the money and see if we can afford to get you the BMX bike. Well, in the meantime, I had been doing this probably for years, knitting on my knitting machine upstairs in the bedroom, and I'd never really been downstairs and heard the knitting machine, because naturally if I was downstairs I wasn't on the knitting machine. So I left Tony upstairs doing the knitting on the knitting machine. I went downstairs and we were watching the telly, and all I could hear from upstairs was crunch, 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 crunch. And I was sitting, I'm looking at my husband, I start laughing. I says, is that what you have had to put up with all this time I've been on this knitting machine? And he said, yes. We didn't see anything to you though. So anyway, we thought, trying to think of some way that we could lessen the noise on the machine. Well, we used to have a dog at the time, a collie, and used to take him out for a walk. Well, where I live, there's railway lines just at the back of my back garden, and we used to cross over. They used to put a crossing on the lines, and we used to go over the lines. And I used to take the dog, and there was a scrapyard as well around there, and I used to take the dog for a walk around there. Well, when the men used to do these railway lines, there used to be little black rubber pads that were there was some kind of buffer to do with the trains coming past. I think they lessened the noise and something like that on the trains going past. But my dog used to keep picking these up. Kim, his name was, and he was terrible for them. And he just wanted us to keep throwing them all the time for him. And we used to keep hiding them all over the house. They were all over in my outhouse, and I used to hide them up on shelves and everything in there. And then I had this idea, and I thought, oh, those little black plastic, those rubber buffer things, oh, they might help. So I got my husband to make... he got a few of them together and screwed, you know, a few of them, put some screw things and made about this thick. And we made 4 of them and put them under the 4 legs of the table that my knitting machine was on. Didn't stop all the noise, but it did help. It wasn't so bad after that, because I got my son to use a knitting machine, and I came downstairs and listened, and they said it wasn't quite as bad, you know. But I felt really sorry when I heard what I must have been doing for all those years while they were putting up with trying to watch the television. In fact, I think one of my sons, when he was in by himself, had earphones fitted into the television. He used to put the earphones into the television so he could hear it. But, like as time went on, I saying I wasn't using the knitting machine anymore, so I didn't need it, and I sold it. But I've been doing a lot of hand knitting lately, and that rosebud pattern that everybody loved, it seems to be the same nowadays. A lot of people seem to like it, and I have been doing some orders for it. And sometimes I wish I'd kept that knitting machine. I could just an odd 1 or 2 I could do, you know, because I don't have quite as much trouble, you know, like like this is what I used to have. But it was continuously knitting all the time that was aggravating it. But I would have used it now, you know, now and again. And sometimes I'm thinking maybe I might buy another knitting machine. There might be one of my subscribers, Angela, she mentioned something about electric knitting machines. And I thought, oh, maybe one of them may have. I wouldn't have to go backwards and forwards like this. Could just maybe press the pedal and it'll go backwards and forwards like a sewing machine. But that's my little story about my knitting machine and why I don't have it anymore. And I loved it when I did have it. So If you like my little story, give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll tell you some more sometime. So, bye for now.